2 Kings chapter 7. To understand the context for chapter 7, we need to back up a little bit into chapter 6. Elisha is a prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. At this point, Israel had divided into two parts, north and the south. The south was called Judah, and the north was called Israel, or Samaria, because Samaria was the capital. There was a great famine, it says, in Samaria. And the king of Israel was passing by the wall one day, it says in verse 26, and he hears a woman crying out to him. And now get this, it gets even worse. And she explains the situation to him when he asks what's going on in verse 28. And she said, there was a woman who came to me, and she said, give me your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. We boiled my son, and we ate him. And I said to her the next day, give me your son, that we may eat him, but she has hidden her son. And so she's complaining to the king that not only it's unfair, but I want to eat her son. I mean, this is just sick. But this is the desperation of the nation of Israel. They needed a miracle of grace. Now the king blamed Elisha for all this, and he sent some people to go get Elisha's head. But Elisha says in chapter 7, he says, hey, you go and tell the king that tomorrow this time you're going to have a lot of food. It's not going to cost you much. The problem will be solved. The scene now changes to verse 3, where there's 4 lepers who are at the entrance of the gate, and they're talking to one another. So they rose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians, and when they came to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, it says, to their surprise, no one was there. It was deserted. Why? Verse 6, God indeed had done a miracle. He did something that they could not do for themselves, that Israel could not do for themselves. The Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of the chariots and the horses and the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. And therefore they arose and fled at twilight, left the camp and attacked their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and they fled for their lives. They just dropped everything and left because God caused this miraculous sound to come, sounding like they were besieged by an army themselves. What a miracle of grace. Well, the lepers walk into this deserted camp in verse 8, and man, those who had nothing to eat but dove droppings now have every kind of food. Then they started taking the silver and gold and hiding it. That's called hoarding, when we take more than we need. And their situation changed overnight because of the grace of God. And then something happened in verse 9. That little God-enabled voice called our conscience. You see, they got a twinge of conscience, and one of them said, this just isn't right. To keep this much blessing to ourselves, let's go and tell the king and his household. And the rest of the story is that they did. The king really didn't believe him at first. He sent some people to check it out. They checked it out. It all checked out. They went, and Israel was saved by a miracle of God, by a gracious miracle that they could not do for themselves, but also because people who went and shared that message. You see, grace means go. When we who gorge on God's blessings experience the grace of God and know the grace of God, that salvation is through faith in what God has done and nothing that I have to do, doesn't that motivate us, or shouldn't that motivate us to go and tell others? So I'm challenged by this verse. I want to go back and look at verse 9 with you and look at the 3 segments of verse 9. The 3 things that these lepers say. First of all, they say, what we're doing is not right. You can bloat on the blessings of God's buffet of grace too long. We rejoice in that. We do Bible studies to understand it better. But at some point, if we do not share that, are we not doing wrongly? And I think that's what those lepers were experiencing when they said, what we're doing is not right. Are we doing all that we can do to share the blessings that we have received with other people? There's a second thing they say that haunts me as well. They say this is a day of good news. The very nature of grace is that I believe it is meant to be shared. Grace means go. It's at the heart of the gospel message. God came to us. Jesus had to come to us. He had to be involved in our world and in our life. We were His mission field. He came to a place which He was not familiar. He came from heaven to the darkness and the sin of earth, and He lived among us so that we could go and live with Him. He left His comfort zone, to say the very least. The third thing they say, come, let us go and tell the king's household. They felt a moral responsibility to share what they had with others. They had a sense of stewardship, in fact, we could say, that they needed to share that message with others. But how about your life? God has given you the gospel of grace and the ministry of the gospel of grace and a wonderful channel and basis and foundation to do that and to spread that message to the rest of the world. Can you go with that message of grace to your neighbor? Can you go with that message of grace and send missionaries who will spread that same message out to the rest of the world? So how can we more effectively meet the need for grace teaching? Well, there's several things I'd like to say about that. First of all, we need to get together to do it because there's more power in numbers, and that's part of the reason that we formed the FGA, Free Grace Alliance. It's an alliance of many churches, many leaders, and many ministries. For example, Grace Life, my ministry, is a member of the Free Grace Alliance. The second principle I would say is that we can do is to get there first. I have found that it's so much easier if you get there first. The challenge is to be a world Christian, to think like God thinks. Grace means go.